Have you ever wondered why the people closest to you can see patterns in your behavior that you remain completely blind to? Why your friends notice when you're being defensive, but you feel perfectly reasonable? Why your family points out traits you possess that you swear you don't have? Carl Jung, the revolutionary Swiss psychiatrist who mapped the depths of human consciousness, discovered something that will fundamentally change how you see yourself. There exists a part of your personality that is crystal clear to everyone around you, yet remains hidden in your own blind spot. This isn't just about self-awareness. This is about a psychological phenomenon so powerful that it secretly shapes every relationship you have, every decision you make, and every way you show up in the world. What you're about to discover in the next 23 minutes will reveal the invisible force that has been influencing your life from the shadows. Jung called this your shadow, but not in the way most people think. This isn't about your dark side or your evil impulses. This is about the disowned parts of yourself that you've pushed so far away from conscious awareness that they now live in a psychological blind spot, visible to everyone except you. You'll learn the 5 unmistakable signs that your shadow is running the show, the 3 ways it sabotages your relationships without you knowing, and most importantly, how to reclaim these lost parts of yourself to become truly whole. The first sign that your shadow is controlling your life from behind the scenes appears in what Jung called projection. Picture this. You're in a meeting, and there's that one colleague who always interrupts everyone. It drives you absolutely crazy. You find yourself thinking, how can they be so rude and completely unaware of it? But here's what Jung discovered. The traits that trigger the strongest emotional reactions in us are often the very traits we possess, but cannot see in ourselves. That colleagues' interrupting behavior creates such intense irritation because somewhere, buried in your unconscious, lives your own tendency to interrupt, to dominate conversations, to need to be heard above all else. Your conscious mind has decided this trait is unacceptable, so it banished it to the shadow realm. But energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transformed or projected outward. Now, instead of owning your own need for attention and working with it consciously, you find yourself surrounded by people who seem to embody this exact quality. Your shadow has turned into a magnet, attracting situations and people who mirror back the very aspects of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. Jung observed that we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. When you have a visceral reaction to someone's behavior, when their actions feel like fingernails on a chalkboard to your soul, you're not just witnessing their personality. You're witnessing a reflection of your own disowned nature. The universe becomes a mirror, constantly showing you the parts of yourself you've rejected, hoping you'll eventually recognize them as your own and invite them back home. The psychological consequence of living in this state of projection is exhaustion. You're constantly fighting battles with external enemies who are actually internal aspects of yourself. You're trying to change and control others instead of integrating and healing the split-off parts of your own psyche. Every argument becomes a shadow boxing match where you're literally fighting yourself, and you can never win because you're both the opponent and the fighter. The second sign reveals itself through what appears to be your greatest strengths. But Jung knew that our most celebrated qualities often mask their opposite in the shadow. If you pride yourself on being incredibly patient, your shadow likely contains a rage that would surprise everyone who knows you. If you're known for being the rational, logical one in every situation, your shadow probably holds intense emotions and irrational impulses that you've spent years learning to suppress. Consider the person who has built their entire identity around being helpful, generous, and selfless. Everyone in their life depends on them, seeks their advice, and praises their giving nature. But late at night, in the quiet moments when the masks come off, they feel a burning resentment. They're tired of always giving, tired of never receiving, tired of being taken for granted. but they can't express this resentment because it contradicts their carefully constructed self-image. So it goes underground into the shadow, where it festers and grows stronger. This dynamic creates what Jung called enantiodromia, the tendency for things to turn into their opposite. The more extreme your conscious identification with one quality, the more powerfully its opposite builds in the unconscious. The perpetually cheerful person eventually experiences crushing depression. The ultra-rational individual finds themselves making completely irrational life decisions. The people-pleaser finally explodes in anger that seems to come from nowhere but has actually been building for years. The tragedy is that this person's helpfulness isn't authentic, it's compulsive. They're not choosing to be generous from a place of wholeness. They're being driven by an unconscious fear of their own selfishness. Their giving becomes a way to keep their shadow at bay, but it never addresses the root split that created the problem in the first place. True generosity can only emerge when you've made peace with your capacity for selfishness. Real patience only develops when you've integrated your impatience. Authentic strength requires acknowledging your vulnerability. The third sign appears in your patterns of attraction and repulsion, particularly in intimate relationships. Jung discovered that we unconsciously seek partners who embody the qualities we've relegated to our shadow. If you've disowned your anger, you'll find yourself drawn to passionate, fiery people. If you've rejected your vulnerability, you'll be attracted to those who wear their emotions openly. Your psyche is constantly trying to heal the internal split by connecting with external representations of your missing pieces. But here's where it becomes complex. The very traits that initially attract you to someone will often become the source of your deepest conflicts. The passion you found irresistible in the beginning starts to feel overwhelming and chaotic. The emotional openness that drew you in begins to seem weak and needy. You're witnessing your own disowned shadow through your partner, and the closer you get, the more uncomfortable it becomes to face these rejected aspects of yourself reflected back to you. This is why so many relationships follow predictable patterns of idealization, followed by devaluation. In the beginning, your partner seems to complete you, and they do, by representing the parts of yourself you've lost touch with. But as intimacy deepens and their human complexity emerges, you start trying to change them, fix them, or control them. You're unconsciously trying to make them express your shadow in a way that's comfortable for you, which is, of course, impossible. Jung called this phenomenon projection of the anima and animus, the feminine aspect in men and the masculine aspect in women. When these internal figures remain unconscious, they get projected onto romantic partners who become carriers of our unlived potentials. The result is relationships filled with unrealistic expectations, dramatic disappointments, and the endless feeling that something is missing. You're not relating to your partner as a whole person. You're relating to them as a repository for the parts of yourself you cannot access directly. If you've been following along and recognizing yourself in these patterns, here's something worth considering. Every person who truly irritates you, every behavior that pushes your buttons, every quality you find yourself constantly criticizing in others, these are all breadcrumbs leading back to your own shadow. Your triggers are your teachers, and your enemies are mirrors dressed up as obstacles. The fourth sign manifests in what Jung termed the persona, the mask you wear to navigate social situations and meet cultural expectations. Everyone develops a persona. It's a necessary part of functioning in society. The problem arises when you become so identified with your mask that you forget there's a real person underneath it. Your shadow contains all the aspects of your authentic self that didn't fit into your chosen persona, all the parts of you that were deemed unacceptable by family, culture, or society. Think about the messages you received growing up about who you needed to be to earn love and acceptance. If you were told that good children don't get angry, your anger went into the shadow. If your family valued intellectual achievement above emotional expression, your feelings went underground. If your culture taught you that certain desires, needs, or ways of being were shameful, those aspects of yourself were banished to maintain your belonging. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. Everything you pushed into your shadow to become acceptable remains alive in your unconscious, continuing to influence your choices and reactions from behind the scenes. The anger you're not supposed to have doesn't disappear. It gets expressed through passive aggression, sarcasm, or sudden explosive outbursts that seem to come from nowhere. The emotions you learn to suppress don't vanish. They leak out through physical symptoms, addictive behaviors, or chronic anxiety. Your shadow becomes a container for everything you had to sacrifice to maintain your persona. But those sacrificed parts never stop trying to return home. They send signals through your dreams, your slips of the tongue, your inexplicable attractions and aversions, your compulsive behaviors, and your strongest emotional reactions. Your unconscious is constantly trying to restore balance by bringing these exiled aspects back into conscious awareness. The psychological cost of maintaining a persona that's disconnected from your shadow is a sense of hollowness, like you're living someone else's life. You might achieve everything you thought you wanted, gain all the approval you sought, and still feel empty inside. That emptiness is the space where your authentic self used to live before you traded it for acceptance. The persona becomes a prison when it's no longer a tool you use, but an identity that uses you. The fifth sign, and perhaps the most crucial one to understand, appears in your relationship with your own power and authenticity. Your shadow contains not only the qualities you've deemed negative, but also the aspects of your greatness that you've been afraid to own. Jung called this the golden shadow, the brilliance, creativity, strength, and magnificence that you've pushed away because claiming it felt too dangerous, too arrogant, or too threatening to others. Many people are more afraid of their light than their darkness. At least, with your perceived flaws, you know how to handle them, hide them, compensate for them, apologize for them. But what do you do with the part of yourself that's capable of extraordinary things? What happens when you acknowledge that you're more talented, intelligent, creative, or powerful than you've been allowing yourself to be? This golden shadow often gets formed in childhood, when displaying your full brightness resulted in negative consequences. Maybe when you showed your intelligence, adults felt threatened and put you down. Perhaps when you expressed your creativity, you were told to be more practical. When you demonstrated leadership, you might have been accused of being bossy or showing off. So you learned to dim your light to make others comfortable. But dimming your light doesn't make it disappear. It just sends it underground, where it turns into resentment, depression, and a nagging sense that you're not living up to your potential. You start attracting situations that mirror this internal split. You find yourself around people who seem confident and self-assured, and instead of inspiration, you feel envious or intimidated. You sabotage opportunities for advancement because some part of you believes you don't deserve success. You downplay your achievements, deflect compliments, and consistently choose the smaller life over the larger one because owning your full power feels too risky. But here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. You cannot become whole by only integrating your darkness. True individuation requires reclaiming both your shadow and your golden shadow, both your rejected darkness and your disowned light. You must learn to own your anger and your joy, your selfishness and your generosity, your weakness and your strength. Wholeness doesn't mean balance in the sense of moderate, lukewarm existence. Wholeness means having access to your full range of human experience and choosing consciously which aspects to express in any given moment. Now let's explore the three primary ways your shadow sabotages your relationships without your conscious awareness. Understanding these patterns is crucial because your relationships serve as the primary arena where shadow work either happens or gets avoided. Every significant relationship in your life is simultaneously a mirror reflecting your unconscious patterns and an opportunity for integration and healing. The first way your shadow undermines your connections with others is through what Jung called shadow projection in intimate partnerships. When you enter a romantic relationship, you unconsciously expect your partner to carry the psychological functions you've relegated to your shadow. If you've disowned your emotional nature, you'll be attracted to emotionally expressive partners, but then criticize them for being too emotional when their feelings become inconvenient. This creates an impossible dynamic where your partner is supposed to provide you with access to your own disowned qualities, while simultaneously controlling how and when they express those qualities. They become responsible for your emotional life, your spontaneity, your creativity, your assertiveness, whatever you've pushed into the shadow, but they're not allowed to express these qualities in ways that make you uncomfortable. The result is that your partner often feels like they're walking on eggshells, never knowing when the qualities you initially found attractive will suddenly become sources of conflict. They're being asked to be your missing pieces while also conforming to your conscious preferences, which is an impossible task that breeds resentment on both sides. The second way involves what could be called shadow bonding, connecting with others through shared complaints, criticisms, and judgments about third parties. This is extremely common and feels incredibly satisfying in the moment because it allows you to discharge the energy of your disowned traits by focusing on how other people embody them. You and your friend, partner, or colleague bond over how annoying, selfish, or irresponsible someone else is, never recognizing that you're both projecting your own shadows onto the same target. This type of bonding feels intimate because you're sharing something that feels true and important, your observations about others' flaws, but it's a false intimacy built on avoiding your own psychological work. Instead of using your triggers as information about your own unconscious patterns, you're using them as ammunition to feel superior to others. The connection you feel with your bonding partner is really the relief of temporarily escaping the discomfort of facing your own shadow. Shadow bonding prevents real intimacy because true connection requires showing up authentically, which means owning your full spectrum of humanity rather than projecting it onto others. When your primary way of connecting involves discussing what's wrong with other people, you're avoiding the vulnerability of revealing what's actually happening inside you. The third way your shadow sabotages relationships is through defensive projections, the unconscious tendency to attribute your own thoughts, feelings, and motivations to others as a way of avoiding responsibility for your internal experience. When you're feeling angry but can't own that anger, you might insist that someone else is angry with you. When you're being controlling but can't acknowledge it, you'll accuse others of trying to control you. This creates a hall of mirrors effect, where genuine communication becomes nearly impossible because you're not responding to what's actually happening. You're responding to your own projections. Your partner says they need some alone time, but you hear rejection and abandonment because that's what your own need for space would mean if you could acknowledge having it. They express concern about a decision you're making, but you hear criticism and judgment because that's how your inner critic sounds when it's directed at yourself. Defensive projections turn every conversation into a battleground where you're fighting phantoms of your own creation. The other person finds themselves constantly defending against accusations that don't match their actual intentions, while you become increasingly convinced that everyone around you is difficult, unreasonable, or out to get you. You're literally creating the very relationship dynamics you fear most by projecting your shadow onto others and then reacting to your own projections as if they were external reality. The psychological consequence of these shadow dynamics in relationships is a profound sense of loneliness, even when you're surrounded by people. You're never truly seen because you're not showing up authentically, and you're never truly seeing others because you're relating to your projections of them rather than their actual humanity. Every relationship becomes a complex dance of shadows, where everyone is responding to psychological ghosts rather than present moment reality. But here's where Jung's work becomes truly transformative. He discovered that the shadow isn't something to be eliminated or transcended. It's something to be integrated, welcomed back into conscious awareness, and worked with as an ally rather than an enemy. The goal isn't to get rid of your shadow, it's to develop a conscious relationship with it so that it stops running your life from behind the scenes. Integration begins with what Jung called active imagination, the practice of dialoguing with the parts of yourself you've disowned. When you notice a strong reaction to someone else's behavior, instead of immediately judging or trying to change them, you pause and ask yourself, what aspect of my own nature am I seeing reflected here? How might this quality live within me, perhaps in a different form? This doesn't mean that other people's behavior isn't actually problematic, or that all your reactions are purely projective. It means that your emotional charge around their behavior is information about your own psyche. Someone might genuinely be acting inappropriately, but if their actions trigger an intense reaction in you, there's something in that trigger that belongs to your own psychological material. The practice is to own your reaction as information about yourself, while still maintaining appropriate boundaries with others' actual behavior. You can acknowledge that someone's rudeness is genuinely rude while also exploring why rudeness triggers such a strong response in you. Maybe you have your own unexpressed rudeness in your shadow, or maybe you have a wounded part that's particularly sensitive to disrespect because of past experiences. True shadow work requires developing what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing forces within yourself without immediately resolving the tension between them. Instead of being either patient or impatient, you learn to acknowledge both your capacity for patience and your capacity for impatience as natural human qualities that serve different purposes in different situations. This is where the work becomes spiritual, not just psychological. Jung discovered that the process of integrating your shadow naturally leads to what he termed individuation, becoming the unique individual you were meant to be, rather than a collection of culturally conditioned responses and unconscious projections. Individuation requires owning both your darkness and your light, both your wounds and your gifts, both your human limitations and your divine potential. As you begin to reclaim the disowned parts of yourself, something remarkable happens. Your relationships start to change without you having to change anyone else. When you stop projecting your anger onto others, you stop attracting angry situations. When you integrate your selfishness consciously, you stop being surrounded by people who seem to take advantage of your generosity. When you own your power, you stop feeling victimized by others' power. This happens because your external reality is constantly reflecting your internal state. As Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. When you're unconscious of your shadow, it seems like life keeps happening to you. You keep encountering the same types of difficult people, falling into the same relationship patterns, facing the same challenges over and over again. But as you integrate your shadow, you realize you're not a victim of circumstances. You're a co-creator of your reality. The most profound revelation in this work is discovering that your shadow contains not only the traits you've rejected, but also the keys to your greatest gifts. Your anger, when integrated, becomes passion and righteous advocacy. Your selfishness becomes healthy self-care and clear boundaries. Your darkness becomes depth and the ability to meet others in their pain without trying to fix them. Jung observed that our wounds and our gifts are often the same thing viewed from different angles. The sensitivity that made you feel broken in childhood becomes the empathy that allows you to heal others. The intensity that felt like too much becomes the fire that fuels your creative expression. The difference between a wound and a gift is often simply whether you're conscious of it and working with it intentionally, or unconscious of it and being driven by it compulsively. This is why shadow work is ultimately about reclaiming your wholeness rather than becoming a better person. You don't need to become better. You need to become more authentically yourself. The parts of you that you've been trying to improve, eliminate, or transcend are often the very aspects that contain your greatest power and uniqueness. But Jung also warned about the spiritual bypass of thinking you can love and accept your shadow without actually doing the difficult work of integrating it. Acceptance without integration is just another form of spiritual perfectionism. True integration means feeling your anger fully and learning to express it constructively. It means acknowledging your selfishness and finding healthy ways to meet your own needs. It means facing your darkness without drowning in it and claiming your light without becoming inflated. The process requires what Jung called holding the tension of the opposites, living in the space between your idealized self-image and your feared self-image until a third option emerges. This third option is your authentic self. Neither the persona you constructed to earn approval nor the shadow you created by rejecting parts of yourself, but the whole, complex, contradictory, magnificent human being you actually are. As we reach the climax of this exploration, here's the most transformative revelation Jung discovered about the shadow. It's not just your personal unconscious material, it's also the container for your unlived potential. Your shadow holds not only the traits you've rejected, but also the dreams you've abandoned, the risks you haven't taken, the person you could become if you stopped playing it safe. Every time you've chosen security over authenticity, conformity over creativity, approval over truth, you've sent another piece of your potential into the shadow realm. Your shadow contains the artist you didn't become because it seemed impractical, the leader you didn't step into because it felt too scary, the lover you haven't allowed yourself to be because it seemed too vulnerable. This is why shadow work is ultimately about liberation, not just from unconscious patterns, but from the prison of a life half-lived. When you reclaim your shadow, you're not just integrating your darkness, you're reclaiming your right to exist fully, to take up space, to be seen in your complexity, to contribute your unique gifts to the world without apologizing for who you are. Jung discovered that the shadow serves as the guardian of authenticity. It holds everything you've had to sacrifice to fit in, belong, and survive. But what served you in childhood, the ability to adapt and conform, can become a limitation in adulthood when it prevents you from accessing your full range of human experience and expression. The ultimate goal of shadow work isn't to become a perfect person, but to become a real person. Reality includes darkness and light, selfishness and generosity, strength and vulnerability, wisdom and foolishness. When you can own all of these aspects of yourself consciously, you stop being driven by unconscious compulsions and start making choices from awareness. This is where the spiritual dimension of Jung's work becomes clear. He saw individuation as a sacred process, a calling from the self, the larger consciousness within you that transcends ego identification. Your symptoms, your triggers, your relationship patterns, your dreams, your attractions and aversions, all of these are communications from this deeper intelligence, inviting you to become more conscious, more whole, more authentically yourself. The path forward requires courage, the courage to face what you've been avoiding, to feel what you've been numbing, to see what you've been denying. But Jung promised that this courage is rewarded with something invaluable: the experience of becoming real. Not perfect, not approved of by everyone, not free from problems, but real. Authentically, unapologetically, magnificently real. As you leave this exploration and return to your daily life, carry with you this understanding. Every person who triggers you is offering you a gift, the gift of recognition. They're showing you an aspect of yourself that wants to come home. Every strong reaction you have is an invitation to go deeper, to ask not what's wrong with them, but what is this teaching me about myself? Your shadow has been waiting patiently for your recognition, for your willingness to turn toward it with curiosity rather than judgment. It doesn't want to destroy your life, it wants to enhance it. It doesn't want to make you worse, it wants to make you whole. The very traits you've been most afraid of often contain the seeds of your greatest gifts. Begin simply. Notice your reactions. Follow your triggers. Pay attention to the people who annoy you most and ask yourself how their qualities might live within you. Start small conversations with the parts of yourself you've been trying to escape. Approach your shadow not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a lost part of yourself that's been waiting to come home. Remember that this work is not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully who you already are, underneath all the conditioning, all the adaptations, all the ways you've learned to hide your authentic nature. Your shadow knows who you really are, and it's been protecting that knowledge until you were ready to receive it. The journey toward wholeness is not a destination, but a way of traveling through life with increasing awareness, compassion, and authenticity. As you integrate your shadow, you'll find that you become less reactive and more responsive, less defended and more open, less driven by unconscious patterns and more guided by conscious choice. This is Jung's ultimate gift to humanity. The understanding that we don't have to remain prisoners of our unconscious patterns, that we can develop a conscious relationship with all aspects of ourselves, and that in doing so, we not only transform our own lives, but contribute to the healing of the collective shadow that affects all of human society. Your willingness to face your own shadow is a gift not only to yourself, but to everyone whose life you touch. When you stop projecting your unconscious material onto others, you create space for real relationship. When you own your power and your vulnerability, you give others permission to do the same. When you become more authentically yourself, you remind others that they too can stop hiding behind masks and meet life directly. The part of you that everyone sees but you deny is waiting for your recognition, your acceptance, your integration. It has been the faithful guardian of everything you've had to sacrifice to survive and belong. Now it's time to reclaim what belongs to you, to become whole, to step into the fullness of who you are meant to be. Your shadow is not your enemy. It's your greatest teacher, your hidden ally, your key to authentic living. The question is not whether you have a shadow. You do. The question is whether you'll continue to let it run your life from behind the scenes, or whether you'll develop a conscious relationship with it and harness its power for your own growth and the benefit of all. The choice, as always, is yours. Is